Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fresh from the Studio. This is our Red Dot edition. Our Red Dot Art Spree is 1 week from today, Thursday, September 5th, and tickets are still available. We have a great lineup of artists showing in the Red Dot Art Spree, and we wanted to highlight these artists who are part of it for the first time this year. We have Rosie Clements, Elena Hernandez-Peña, Bethany Johnson, and Grace Nguchu presenting their work. You'll get a sneak peek of their process, and you'll get to see the work that they will have on view at Red Dot. So we're going to start today with Grace.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Grace W. Nguchu. I'm a visual artist that is based in Austin, where I've lived for 20 years. But I was actually born and raised originally in Kenya. And I did come to the US in 1998 as a student to obtain my master's degree. That was in Hawaii, and then eventually found my way to Austin. So I've lived here since then. All right. Everybody can see my screen, right?
Yeah, it looks great.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so just wanted to say one of the main things in my work is it is dedicated to capturing the beauty, richness, and diversity of nature, and also at the same time try to explore the dynamic relationship between human beings and our environment. Now, within that, there's actually a deeper message that I'm trying to communicate, and that is a call to action to protect and safeguard the earth for future generations. Okay, so one of the main influences in my work is definitely the Kenyan landscape. The reason being is just because I consider it greatly diverse from the desert-like region, which is kind of located in the northern areas, to the mountainous forest areas within the central part, and then the southeastern region, we have the tropical coastal, place. I'm mesmerized by nature's vibrant colors, shapes, and sizes, and how we human beings interact with it as a whole. In many of my paintings, as you can see, the landscape does take center stage, and then with humans, kind of depicted in diminutive scale, to kind of just emphasize the vastness and magnificence of the natural realm. In doing so, I just kind of want to remind viewers how small we are, in the grand scheme of life. It is my hope that my work does offer the viewer an opportunity to see the world from a different perspective, hence evoking a sense of nostalgic longing to connect and preserve, nature. I tend to paint a lot of trees, mountains, and sometimes the ocean. That's just because I feel like we really depend on these items in nature, to provide food, shelter. Plus, they're also kind of like a symbol of resilience, and a continuation, like they'll always be there, With this, with these two trees, I just kind of wanted to reflect how I started with my body of work. On the far left-hand side, I depicted the tree painting kind of on a more realistic, style. But I've kind of experimented with different styles, and I've sort of moved on to the more expressive style of painting that is found in the painting that is on the far right-hand side. I feel that is more something that I kind of leaning towards. Now, regarding my studio practice, I try to maintain that, consistently. I do also take art classes on the side. I work mainly with acrylics, And I try to use vibrant colors to express the beauty that I do see in nature. Hence, you see that hot pink base that kind of has been the theme within all my paintings, because I feel like that it communicates what I'm really trying to portray. So the first thing I do, the way I approach my work is, first of all, I take photographs of the landscape that I intend to paint. And then I do use technology to adjust a couple of things here and there. And then I move on to doing quick sketches. This kind of helps me set up the composition and introduce any imagination or imaginative items that I kind of want to add into the painting. And with the sketches, I do use different mediums. That's where I'm kind of a little bit more free. I use like, charcoals, pastels, pens, pencils, whatever. All right. So this is one of the paintings that I submitted, and just wanted to, again, state that this painting, it was completed in 2022, and it's titled "I Brood, Yet I Shine." This area is kind of magical to me. It's a place that I always have to stop by whenever I travel back to Kenya to see my family. So it's a place that I keep passing by every year. And this area is located within what is called the Great Rift Valley. It's a place kind of located within two cities. And within the area, there's a lake that, actually holds, large concentrations of bird life. There's also like a pristine forest kind of surrounding it that is home to other wildlife such as zebras, antelopes, and then beyond the hills are endless, plains. So this place always has this allure and a sense of mystique attached to it, and that's why I was highly inspired to paint it. The second painting that I submitted, I completed also this in 2022. It's titled Walking into the Unknown. The backstory is that I took a trip to the coastal region with my family, and a guide kind of coaxed us into taking a tour into the Indian Ocean, using a glass bottom boat. And these tours usually take place in the mornings because the tide really ebbs far out into the shore. So to get to the boat, you literally walk on the ocean bed. So you kind of get to see the reef and also some, marine life. So it just invokes this sense of adventure, uncertainty. You don't know what you're going to experience. So that definitely inspired me also to, paint this work, this piece of art. All right, so that's it with my artist talk. If you wanted to reach me, you can get me by email. Also, I have my website, gracewnguchu.com, and also I'm on the Instagram at gracewnguchu. All right, thank you so much for hearing me.
Thank you, Grace.
Any questions?
Next up, we have Bethany Johnson.
All right, thank you. Okay. I am going to time myself so I don't go on. I know we have a fairly limited amount of time per person, and I'm going to attempt to not talk like an auctioneer because I have a lot to share and I'm excited to share it. So my name is Bethany Johnson. Thanks so much to those of you at Women in Their Work for putting these programs together and for including me in the Red Dot edition. I'm happy to be here. So I'm going to jump in. I'm going to start with a few images of past work just to set the stage and create some context for what I'm up to and kind of what I am interested in. And then I will pivot into talking excitedly about the things that I'm really embedded in the studio right now, including some source material and some research and some behind the scenes things. So that's the plan. I'm just going to go ahead and jump into it. So my practice is based in a deep foundation in drawing and works on paper. Drawing to me is a really important medium as one that is really close to the notion of thought and knowledge and information seeking. And, it has these parallels with the notion of like the document and, the scientific and things that kind of communicate information. And that's in terms of content and imagery, has always been a through line in my work, is really thinking about how images can be both kind of subjective and objective, and how do we look at things through different lenses, and what do we gain, what do we lose when looking at things kind of through these different kind of academic disciplines, and how can we kind of collapse those things onto each other. So this is an older drawing that also this practice led into collage work as well, kind of letting the imagery kind of act as itself, but also kind of recombining those landscapes. Similarly to Grace, really thinking about how, humans are kind of interacting with and manipulating our landscape as well. So I think there's some parallels there. And then more recently, kind of starting 2020 and on, these works also kind of popped into 3 dimensions. And so I started on this body of sculptural works where the materials had, started to kind of have their own kind of material sense in the collages, and now are really becoming kind of central to the kind of construction of these sculptures that then are still kind of speaking to those ideas of kind of these almost like miniature landscapes or core samples, very kind of geology inspired, and kind of thinking about that notion of kind of layering and stacking and deep time. And so, the materials are both now kind of functioning as kind of a material sculptural sense, but also still in this kind of image making language as well, with these kind of faceted forms. This is the work that is in the Red Dot Art Spree, one of my favorites, also kind of playing with that kind of disjuncted kind of line, again, kind of geology inspired, and thinking about how materials kind of behave under pressure. And here's one of the more recent works as well. And so these also, combine what we might think of as natural materials as well as man-made materials, but also kind of troubling the boundary between those two, right? Because they're all kind of mined or sourced somewhere. So again, kind of thinking about that complication between kind of the man-made and the natural, and the implications for us on kind of our own landscaping when it comes to, landfills and road cuts and all of the ways that we kind of create landscape as humans as well. And so I just wanted to show too a little bit of behind the scenes of kind of how these are constructed, just to kind of give a little bit of material sense of how these are made. So they're really densely packed and held together with hardware. So they become these really kind of like heavy, like literally kind of weighty objects. And here's just a little bit of my source material, kind of things that I think about and work with, or that are kind of in the background of the visual language of my work. So we have images here from the UT Geology Library, which I love, as well as I feel like this central bottom image is a nice little package or kind of metaphor for the ways that I think about making art, or kind of the subject matter that interests me. This is one of my favorite moments from science history. So this was when NASA had sent its first probe past Mars to take photos. And so this was the first image that was coming back from Mars, that was coming back in like really discrete bits of data. And the scientists were so impatient to kind of see the image that they were printing off that data and filling it in kind of like a paint by number with pastels to kind of see the image as quickly as they could. So that kind of layering of, the scientific and the artistic and this kind of poetic search for knowledge and for understanding and kind of reaching out into the universe is just something that is really interesting to me, and in some way is kind of connected to my work, no matter what form it takes. And that image also offers a nice segue into what I'm researching and working on now, which also has to do with kind of astronomy and space exploration. And so I am currently doing a lot of research around planetary analogs. So a planetary analog is a site on Earth that has been identified by scientists or space agencies as being representative of, or kind of a stand-in for, landscapes on different planets or moons. And so either geologically or in terms of the climate, it kind of can stand for and be used as a test site for kind of speculative space exploration. And so I find these settings really kind of powerful, again, thinking about just the kind of human quest for knowledge and kind of reaching as far as we can, while still, most of us, being kind of terrestrially bound for our lifetimes, right? And that feels really kind of poetic and interesting, and also really complicated in terms of what goes into space exploration and the kind of dynamics behind that in the real world. So it's just something that has been something that I've really fallen into. This is a working document that I have on Google Earth, where I've kind of identified all of the sites that I've found in my research, and have started to compile. They're in this format so that I can start thinking about which ones can be reached or kind of accessed for my own research. Here's a big long spreadsheet. There's way more of this of kind of learning about these sites as well. And I actually just completed my first trip to some of these sites. I went to Utah and Idaho to visit some settings where I was taking photographs, and just right now kind of processing those photographs and kind of figuring out where to go with them from here. So thinking about using those photographs in the collages so that they're kind of built in to the imagery, as opposed to the found imagery from before, or kind of interacting with that imagery. And so I'm really excited. I literally this morning was starting to print things off, and color shifting and all of that, and kind of taking next step with these images. So this is very fresh. And then just ending with a few images that, again, represent some of the work that is coming out of this idea. Again, kind of combining collage and drawing, and now also incorporating non-paper surfaces. So surfaces that kind of have their own identity or materiality or kind of physicality, which feels like it kind of connects them back to the sculptures, so that they are kind of speaking some of that language of the materials being able to kind of be themselves. And so these are really interesting to me at the moment, again, thinking about all of the different ways that Earth, the kind of world is translated, either physically in these materials, or visually through these different modes of representation. And so these are some of the earliest works, both very small scale and somewhat small scale. And then surrounding me right now are some really big pieces of porcelain tile and marble and other materials that have been gathered that are going to kind of turn into some of these new works as well, that again kind of talk to both that sculptural and that kind of image making side of it. And so that's my last image, and we're at 10 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap that up. Thanks so much for listening. I could talk about this all day. Again, if you want to find more about my work, there's a couple of spots to go there in the bottom corner. And yeah, thanks again so much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Elena Hernandez-Peña.
Hi everyone. I am gonna share my screen really quickly. All right, so my name is Elena Hernandez-Peña. I'm a photographer living and working in San Antonio, Texas. I really enjoy alternative methods of developing and printing specifically, which, as you can see, these are a lot of cyanotypes that I am currently making or have made. This project in the background here is a continuation of a series that I started in 2022. But I wanted to kind of give you all some background on where the inspiration for these cyanotypes come from, and a little bit about the process as well. And then I'll talk about some other stuff and what I'm working on as well. So a lot of these pieces start with a singular photograph for the most part, or a really small groupings of a small grouping of photographs. A lot of these photos are family photos. I take a lot of photos in my day-to-day life as well, and normally they're actually cell phone photos. I spent a lot of time in commercial photography, and it kind of made me hate my big fancy camera. So now I just take a lot of photos on my cell phone and I turn them into digital negatives a lot of the time. These are some more kind of examples of photos that kind of kicked off this series as well. A lot of the people in the images, sometimes they're people I don't know, but most of the time, a lot of the time, they are family members, some that I've never met, and I use my parents a lot, especially my mom, in my work. A lot of the work pertains to the idea of the family unit and family histories as well, whether that be invisible histories or the histories that we tell ourselves, which kind of led me to kind of filling in the blanks, and that's where that storytelling kind of comes in. This piece to the left is the piece that I submitted to Women in Their Work and will be on display. But these pieces also have photograms in them, and a lot of the objects, like the horse to the right here on the right corner, are little found objects that I collect to kind of add to that storytelling kind of look, but also I feel like it gives these pieces a little more of a kind of like a mythological look to them, or fantasy a little bit, which I really like. I use a lot of rosaries in my work, a lot of imagery from Catholicism. And then I included this kind of little corner of a piece to kind of give an example of how I layer transparencies. I do use Photoshop from time to time, but a lot of times I am sitting kind of collaging the actual transparencies, cutting them with a little X-Acto knife and kind of building upon images, which I feel like creates kind of a nice distortion, but it's also my way of creating these fake kind of little shrines that I like to build. A lot of times I put women in my family, or women that I see on the internet that are sometimes characters. I use sometimes cartoon characters in my work, everything, and kind of build those layers up to make these little fantasy pockets. These images were used earlier this year to kind of start a body of work that I did for a show in Austin that was at Mass Gallery. It was called Hyperfemme, and it was all about kind of reclaiming sexual agency and also exploring identities and the complexities of my own identity as a woman, and kind of poking fun at the sexy Latina Mexican tropes. I kind of got addicted to watching these sexy weather women that I remembered from my childhood. And I went into a deep dive on YouTube, watching interviews about them and how they felt about their careers. And also at the same time, I was reading a lot about ancient civilizations and the roles of women within those civilizations. And I really like to use artifacts in my work, and that's kind of a call to that. This was one of the pieces that I did for that Hyperfem show. I feel like all of the imagery kind of speaks to what I just went over. And this was kind of a larger scale of the wall that a lot of those pieces were on. And for these pieces in particular, I thought it'd be kind of fun to speak about the pink color, because I got asked a lot about how I did and achieved that color. It was a UV reactive dye. So I kind of really like to play with anything that's UV reactive, because anything that's UV reactive, you can kind of make photographic prints out of. There's UV resins that you can even make prints out of, but this was just a dye that I coated on cotton paper. And because it was a clothing dye, I had to boil the paper, which was really crazy because I lost a lot of prints in the attempt to make these. But yeah, super similar to cyanotypes. Once again, I have the photograms and the negatives that I used on these as well. And I also wanted to show the two lights in this photo. There are two kind of like saint-like light sources, which kind of inspired me for what I'm currently working on right now. Here are some close-ups of those little pink pieces that I included here. And that's the last one of that series. I'm gonna skip ahead kind of quickly to these last for these last few minutes to talk about what I'm super fresh working on right now. These two photographs were sent to me by my mom recently when I was asking about my grandmother's childhood and kind of trying to learn more about my mom's lineage. She is from the tribe, the Lipan Apache tribe here in Texas. And I wanted to see more photos because our lineage kind of eventually stopped 2 great-grandparents ago. And so she sent me these photos of my grandmother, and immediately I thought of the idea of, or the actuality of, assimilation. I ended up building these little light sources. They're lamps, but I plan on making other more sculptural type structures. The material I used was rawhide, and I use image transfers as well. The rawhide is kind of a callback to my ancestors, but also my dad is a leather worker, and so he actually helped me build a lot of these because they were extremely hard to sew by hand. We had to sit face to face, passing each other a needle back and forth, which felt really sweet in a lot of ways. And here is another view of the other side of that lamp. And yeah, I have been thinking a lot about lost or altered history or even identity in the face of external pressures or erasure. And what is lost and what is retained is what I have been thinking a lot about. And these lamps were kind of little odes to that. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thanks so much.
Yes.
And next up, we have Rosie Clements.
Hi, everyone. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Everybody see that okay?
Yes, that looks great.
Awesome. Okay, so hi, everybody. I'm Rosie Clements. I am a photographer first and foremost, but within the past couple of years, my practice has been expanding to include sculpture and print. But across all the mediums that I do work in, my practice is very based in images. I grew up in Arizona and I moved to Texas in 2022 to get my MFA from UT Austin. And I just recently relocated to Los Angeles. So that's where I'm living at the moment. In my recent work, I make digital photographs and reconstitute them as physical objects, which allows me to test the boundaries between material and virtual worlds. So lately, I'm working on a series that I'm calling Pure Semblance. And the works in this series, I make them using something called a UV printer, which is a unique kind of digital printer that uses ultraviolet light to cure ink as soon as it is applied to a surface. I first learned about this method of printing when I was in grad school, and I was lucky enough to have access to a UV printer in the university's fabrication lab. One of my favorite things about this method of printing is the way that details are rendered on top of the bubbles versus in between them. So the way that a UV printer works, it works similarly to a regular printer. Like if you saw it, it kind of just looks like a really large scale printer, but it sprays the ink out as it passes over the material. So you determine the highest point of the material, and then the printer head sprays the ink out at that height as it passes over the material. So what happens is you wind up getting like really high quality or like high definition details on top of the bubbles, since those are closer to the printer head. And then in between the bubbles, it's really blurred or abstracted. So for all of these slides, I've tried to include a couple of different angles of the work, because one of my favorite things about these pieces is that they're almost a little bit like optical illusions. For a lot of the pieces, you can't really see what the image is until you're at the right distance or the right angle. And so from certain distances or angles, the image is often totally abstracted, which personally, I really love that quality of the work. And I can't quite depict it in documentation. So I really think that these images are best seen in person. Yeah, so while I was at UT, I was very lucky to have access to a small UV printer. And so I immediately started experimenting with it, I think like day 2 of grad school. And I just did a whole bunch of different experimental ways of printing my images on different materials. I was printing on things like popcorn ceiling tiles and rocks and fake fur and things like that. And a lot of these experiments didn't work. The photos would be either completely illegible or sometimes actually too legible. But one afternoon, I found a sheet of bubble wrap on the sidewalk and I decided to try printing on it. And I was so excited by the effect. The bubbles really remind me of squishy, tactile pixels. And I feel like out of all the materials that I had tried printing on, there was like an actual dialogue between the photo and the surface in this case, which I was really excited by. So the more I thought about it, I realized that since bubble wrap is typically thrown away after one use, it really mirrors the fleeting nature of digital photographs that we easily share and forget in our media-saturated world. And digital images and the way that we interpret them in modern society that has really become like a core tenet of my research and what I'm thinking about in the past year. And so as a photographer who makes digital photographs, I'm really interested in what happens when I move those photographs between the physical and the virtual. So I'm thinking about what is gained or lost, what meanings are made. And I'm not really interested in like answering those questions. And I think for all of the images that I print on these surfaces, the meanings are kind of different because it depends on the context of the imagery. But I think that I'm excited about the possibility. For me, this way of printing kind of frees the image in a way. The final piece is abstract, but it's made up of real tangible materials. And like it's made up of these components of the real world. It's physical, but it obtains its color and its aesthetic from the virtual. So to me, these pieces are both at once. They're physical and virtual. And they're also neither. They're kind of something in between. And so that's what I'm most excited about. So I love this piece in particular because I feel like this is one of the best examples of what I was talking about, where the details on top of the bubbles can be super fine. So like in this image, you can see this person's beard hairs actually, and then his their butterfly earring. But then the space between the bubbles is so blurry or just so illegible that it's really abstracted. This one especially is like, you really have to be in the right spot to see what's going on. And if you can't tell, it's just a photograph like of somebody's side of their face, their ear and their butterfly earring and their sunglasses. So this is a piece that I submitted to Women in Their Work. So it's included in the Red Dot Art Spree. And one thing I forgot to mention is that I've been experimenting with different ways of displaying these pieces. And lately I've been showing them, showing them inside these plexiglass lids. And then there's a canvas backing behind the lid. So they're totally encased. You can kind of, maybe not quite see it in this one either, but there's like a clear plexiglass lid that's covering the bubble wrap. And on this piece, I actually included I made three of the same prints of this image. And so at different angles, you can kind of see like the depth. There's 3 sheets of bubble wrap with the same image that are stacked on top of each other and then enclosed in this lid. And their bubbles are sort of like pressed up against the plexi. So you can kind of see in this picture how they're sort of like squished against the plastic. And I really just like that, the sort of tension of like, are these bubbles like about to pop? Are they? And they're actually quite safe. They're not being like, there's not a ton of pressure on them, but I just really like the texture of the work and that sort of tension between like this really soft, fragile, temporary sort of material that's like encased in something like plastic, which is really hard and protective and like, yeah. So for me, this series and these works, Pure Semblance, they're really inviting the viewer to reconsider the way that they interact with images. And I really want them to emphasize the importance of texture and materiality in an era that is dominated by the intangible digital realm. So here's some contact information on my website. And if you would like to hear more, talk more, ask questions, anything, I would love to talk with you. So thank you so much again to Women in Their Work for the opportunity to share more about this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone so much for your presentations. I really enjoyed hearing about everyone's approach to images that they're seeing throughout life, whether it's related to memory, outer space images, science, digital, personal images. I would also like to now open up the floor to a brief Q&A session. So if anybody in the audience has any questions, feel free to jump in. I'm also happy to read any questions that might come up in the chat as well. But we have about 15 minutes before 1, so it should be a lot of time to kind of hear some more about y'all's work and their interactions, if there are any, within each other. I actually kind of have a quick question too. It's kind of a small question. And this one is for Elena. And I kind of wanted to hear more about the interviews with the weather women that you were doing research on and how they looked back on their experience and if it was a sort of positive takeaway for them or if they have any like changed thoughts about their role in culture in that way. So that's just a very small question about it.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. It was really interesting because I think for a lot of women in Mexico, sexuality, beauty, is all glorified. And so I think a lot of these women from the interviews that I read wanted everyone to know that they were real meteorologists and they really did work hard for their positions. But in order to keep those positions and keep viewers entertained, they had to appear as sexy and as perfect as possible. So, they also need money, right? They need to kind of play the game that we are all playing, whether it's like in the world of capitalism or in the complexities of a career like that, a career in which shouldn't be entertainment, but it is entertainment. A lot of TV in Mexico is like that. So I think these women kind of hone into that in a way and embrace it and try and capitalize on it as much as they can. But I think it is really complex because they do want to be taken really serious. So that's kind of what I took away from a lot of these women, because a lot of them do have OnlyFans accounts and they kind of keep up that persona on the internet outside of being on TV and telling people about the weather. And at times I think for them it's almost like comical, that like hypersexuality almost becomes like a character of itself. But yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, some of the outfits and the posing I feel like are very hyper. So could see that
Yes.
fitting into the show. And there is a question slash comment in the chat that I'll read out from Betty, who is interested in how some of these materials will age. I feel like with Grace, I guess you have acrylic, there's very precedence for kind of maintaining that. But I think especially for Rosie, your bubble wrap, and I don't know if it like loses air over time. And then with Bethany, you've got like the compressed like materials of cardboard and all those like artificial materials. While Elena, you've got I heard the UV reactive material that you're using too. And so I don't know if, depending on how fresh these images and works were made, if y'all have experienced any changes over time as you've held on to these pieces for longer.
Bethany, do you want to go first?
Sure. Sure, I can go. So yeah, I've thought about this when it comes to the like laminated composite materials because they all have their own behaviors, you know, when it comes to like humidity or time. And in general, you know, I have 4 years of life with some of these constructions, and there is certainly like the possibility that the papers will change color, right? Because like a lot of them are not archival papers. So, you know, the way that newspaper yellows or something like that. I actually find that possibility kind of interesting because it just gets to like live its life and maybe kind of slowly transform over time. I think my history as an artist has been learning how to let go of some control where you know I would early in my practice I feel like I had to have kind of a plan and kind of everything is very controlled from the beginning to the end. And I think allowing for some of that kind of accident and the way that the work kind of lives its own life is something that I'm working on accepting or kind of understanding or embracing about the work. So
I can relate to that a lot, Bethany. Yeah, so like I explained, I'm really a photographer first and foremost, but I've always felt a little out of place in the photography world. Like I've never quite fit into it. I think that there is a lot, there's this mindset that I see a lot in the photography world where things need to be really perfect or the goal is perfection and like the perfect image with the perfect exposure and then you print it with this archival ink and it's perfect and like that's never really been for me. And so personally, I really love this application with this material because it does have at least the opportunity to kind of undergo some changes over time. That being said, the UV ink and the UV printer, like those are typically, that application is typically used for like really large scale, like billboards and things like that, which are intended to be outside and in all kinds of weather. So the printer and the ink are actually really intended for like a very durable, long-lived print. But as far as I know, nobody's using this application, so I can't really say how long they will last for. But to me, some change over time and some fluctuation is like inherent to the work and something that I'm excited about. I just started, this process is very new for me. So I started making these prints like about 1.5 years ago, and they actually have really proven to be quite durable. I've shipped some of them overseas and they did just fine. I moved with them to LA from Austin and they did fine. They're more durable than, honestly, than I originally thought they would be. Yeah, but I'm excited about the possibility for them to sort of change over time and kind of have a life of their own.
Yeah.
And when you commented about like, when you commented about like shipping them, it made me think of, how it's like kind of this funny like inversion of, the bubble wrap being usually the thing that's like the disposable exterior, right?
I feel like I could do like a whole aspect of the series just on that, like the joke sort of like shipping material.
Yeah.
So there's actually 2 questions in the chat also. First one is for Bethany, from Constance White, who is curious about the idea of scale for your work, especially the work on terrazzo and marble, and if you've considered any aspect of these materials as functional or decorative in public or commercial spaces, such as like vault floors, walls, counters, etc.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to answer this question, so I'll try to just be brief about it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to think about the ways in which these surfaces or materials can be layered with what we know of them from our lived worlds, right? Because I think one of the things that I'm playing with is how, there's kind of the actual stone from the mountain, right? And then it becomes this very rectilinear form that is mostly how we interact with these materials in our like lived worlds, right? And how that's like a really huge translation of that material to begin with. And so it then does start to become about these kind of like architectural environments and inventions and transformations of the natural world. So yeah, I was just walking through Lowe's yesterday and looking at like the big slabs of laminate countertops, and thinking about those as kind of interesting, identifiable objects that also are kind of these several steps removed from nature, kind of these representations of nature. That was a very kind of free form answer, but yes, I'm really interested in scale and how these kind of live in these architectural spaces once they exist.
Thank you for that, Bethany. And then this next question is for everyone, from Grace, who is curious to hear how you each emotionally engage with your practices. What are the difficult or big emotions that you navigate the most often? And actually, Grace, if you want to start this one, because I feel like you're making work about where you were born, and I feel like the connection of such a intense pink color along with work that is from your personal experience, especially with your family while traveling, could be relevant. So do you want to start out with that answer?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think for me, the big emotions I think I'm really trying to portray is that, first of all, trying to let the viewers know that there's another beautiful world that they can come and explore, you know. So I really try to capture that by I kind of market sort of, you know, my country, my birth country to people. And I want to show how diverse we are. And then the second thing is that I'm kind of also holding, the other emotion that I struggle with is also, I'm trying to hold on to what is actually disappearing. So, and that is why, you know, in that deeper sense, I'm trying to tell people to please, you know, see this and let's try to preserve this, because, you know, in 5, 10, 20 years, it's not going to be there anymore. So those are the things I really, I think are big for me whenever I approach my paintings. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And for the rest of y'all, open question, sort of what big emotional challenges, or maybe they're a good thing to feel these emotions as we're working, especially in the arts. Any of y'all have any thoughts behind that?
I feel like I get super attached to my pieces, which is really silly. I think because I am reflecting often on generational trauma or my family's history, it can be weirdly emotional. And it's funny because in cyanotype especially, I'm making like a million different prints that are all different. A lot of times I have no control over how certain parts of them come out. I still get, I wouldn't say like emotional in the sense of like wanting to cry, but I feel like they have a lot of soul to them. And I think that it's part of the content too. It's content that is reminding me a lot of even my childhood, like the images of or even like the little relics from Catholicism. Even though I'm not Catholic, I still grew up in a Catholic household. So it kind of points to all of that just swirling in my head. So I do feel like my work is an extension of me, but it also feels like they take on their own little heart and souls. Yeah. Thank you, Grace, for that question.
Yeah, and I think especially like when you were talking about how you and your father were working on the leather lamps, just the image of y'all passing the needle back and forth.
Mhm.
I feel like that's like a very powerful image that is sort of imbued into your artwork and your own personal history.
Yeah.
But yeah, if Rosie or Bethany, you have I feel like y'all have very sort of like almost scientific approaches. I mean, especially the like content of your work too is Bethany is like very tied to all this data and graphic imagery as well. How that translates to more like raw emotion.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, speaking to just kind of like the emotional experience of being a maker of things, you know, one very kind of simple way of answering that question in a way is also how much kind of failure happens behind the scenes. You know, I think there's a lot of material experimentation in my work, and also quite a bit of labor. And so there's a lot of things that don't make it out of the studio, and kind of on a day by day basis, when you're kind of like living that and experiencing that, it feels like a lot of failure. But then, you know, on the outside, everyone else just sees the things that make it out and get seen, and that work out. And so I think that maybe just kind of speaking universally to the experience of being a maker is that there's a lot of experimentation. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because I just had one fall off the wall the other day and break. So maybe that's just top of mind right now.
That's always like a stab in the heart. I had that happen recently. I think that my work is maybe probably reads as not super emotional on the surface. And I mean, I think I'm someone who kind of tries to like suppress their emotions a little bit, which is not necessarily a good thing. But the images that I'm applying to bubble wrap with this in this series are all either pictures of my friends, or they are like depicting these scenes in my everyday life that I do have a personal connection to. So whether it's like a depth of like a personal relationship, or just like an experience that I want to memorialize, that's where the imagery is coming from. And then there's also like another component to this series that like I don't quite know how to like put into words yet, so I feel like I'm going to stumble over it right now. But I've always been someone who's really self-conscious and really in my head a lot. And so this series includes a lot of images, like a lot of portraits. And when I was making these portraits of my friends, like often they would like I would ask to photograph them, and they'd be like, well, I don't know, like I'm kind of shy or nervous, or I don't photograph well. And I can relate so much to that. And I feel like I really love to photograph people who, you know, we can relate to each other in that way. And then I really loved the images that came out of those shoots that I felt almost depicted this like aspect of their personality that might not even be on the surface. Like I think they look really confident in a lot of the images, and like really like the word that's coming to mind is like sassy, like really just kind of like I don't care sort of attitude, which is not necessarily who they are, but it is kind of like a part of them, or maybe it's honestly like a part of myself that I wish that I was more like confident, and like I'm sort of looking for that in other people, and it's like a reflection of myself. I don't quite know how to like put it into words, but there definitely is like an emotional layer to the work for me that is not really on the surface, which is sort of me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Rosie. I think that's very relatable sentiment for a lot of people. And I do see that kind of comfort in the subjects that you photograph. So definitely a talent of the photographer to be able to bring that out of someone. So we are just a minute past 1. I'd like to thank you guys again for such wonderful presentations. I thought they were all really interesting, and definitely excited to have your pieces included in the show. I'd also like to thank the audience for your wonderful questions and encouraging comments. Just to reiterate, a week from today is going to be Red Dot Art Spree, September 5th, and you can have a chance to purchase all or any of these wonderful artworks that we saw and heard about today. And then just a quick plug for Women in Their Work. After Red Dot, we have a solo show opening with Hiba Ali. Their opening is going to be Saturday the 28th, so I hope that everyone can also join us for that. But on that note, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and thank you again for this great presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.